Was selecting Jaylen Walker Falcons GM Terry Fontenot's way of making up for passing on Micah Parsons 4 years ago?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, where right now new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 20 years, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that goes strong with me, whether you've been here for almost 15 years since we first started doing this podcast, or you just only showed up in the last 15 seconds. I appreciate you as an everydayer. That means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day. All you got to do to become an everydayer, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode is part 2 of a conversation I had this past Thursday with GoLongTD.com's Tyler Dunne, who recently penned a piece on Falcons general manager Terry Fontenot and the Falcons' quote-unquote unique, quote-unquote rebellious, quote-unquote one-of-one approach to the draft the last couple of years. And in the first part of that conversation, we discussed how Michael Penix, could be the Falcons franchise quarterback. And that's a big piece of Terry Fontenot's grand vision, grand plan for the Falcons, not only to be a contender in the NFC this year, but obviously in the years to come. So go check out part 1 if you have not quite yet. And I'll link to the article that Tyler wrote in the description below. But today we get into part 2, where Tyler is going to give his thoughts on the Jaylen Walker and James Pearce selections. We'll get a deeper dive in the controversy surrounding anonymous scout quotes that, were some of the quotes that we talked about with James Pearce and why he was a controversial pick. And given that, some of those came from Bob McGinn, who is Tyler's colleague over at GoLong TD. And so we'll get into Tyler's thoughts on his sort of that controversy as well. But without further ado, let's jump into that conversation with Tyler Dunne of GoLongTD.com right now. So obviously, we might be saying, in the future, it's pulling a Terry Fontenot when you double dip on something, right? Last year it was the quarterback. This year it was the edge rushers. That may be just a new trend in the NFL where it's like you get 2 swings of the bat in order to at least double your chances of getting at least one hit. And we'll see if Michael Penix proves that to be true. And obviously with Jaylen Walker and James Pearce being the team's 2 first-round selections, they're hoping that both of these guys obviously hit, but certainly double the chances of at least getting one impact pass rusher. But talking about the Jaylen Walker selection, I thought it was a pretty cool anecdote that you wrote up with Falcons team president Greg Beadles being on hand for that combine interview with Jaylen Walker and sort of turning to Terry Fontenot afterwards, given how impressed they were. And everybody's so impressed with Jaylen Walker and being like, is there a chance that he's going to be there at pick 15? When, digging deep into the Falcons process to acquire Jaylen Walker, what were some of the things that stood out to you in learning through that process?
Right. I think that it kind of begins and ends with the tape. Like Terry Fontenot said, we've got our scouts doing all this work and they're telling us all these amazing things about Jaylen Walker, the human being. But what they saw on tape is somebody that can line up anywhere, rush through any gap, play on the ball, play off the ball. When they sat down at the combine and Terry just asked him point blank, what position do you envision playing? He's like, defense. And that's kind of how he'll be used. But I do think that it is all that other stuff that kind of took it to another level where they see him at the combine. And this is the direct quote from Terry. When we talked about it, he said, when you meet him, you get chills. You want your son to grow up to be like that guy. I feel like Terry Fontenot has a good read on people. It's a people business, and like the tape matters, and they would have taken Jaylen Walker wherever based on that. But he just got a sense that this is somebody that we can win a championship with. He's wired the right way. Like he's walking through the hallways at the University of Georgia a distinct manner, because he knows all these underclassmen are watching him day to day. And I feel like that only grew. I mean, they have their local pro day, and Jalen Walker's rapping Terry, and then Terry's son in this big bear hug. And all along they're kind of thinking, this is great, but man, it ain't happening. Somebody's going to take him. There's scouts who told our Bob McGinn that they like Jalen Walker more than Abdul Carter. So you're thinking at 15, is he going to be there? And I asked Terry at one point, like, did you consider trading up for Jalen Walker? And he said, no, we really did want to stay there at 15, because as the process kind of went along, the only guys they knew for sure weren't going to be there were Cam Ward, Travis Hunter, and Carter. So they kind of did leave that crack of the door open. Like, okay, maybe he'll be there. If he's not, we can take James Pearce there. And he falls, thanks to the Panthers, thanks to the 49ers preferring Walker's teammate. And they take him, and they immediately transition to James Pearce. So like I said, I mean, I've been covering this NFL since 2010, and you hear these general managers at press conferences just feed you the BS of, oh, we got everybody we wanted, best available player, and all broke in our favor. Well, I think the Falcons are saying it broke in their favor, but they mean it, because it's not like it's just best available. Like Terry Fontenot, Raheem Morris, everybody knew going into this thing, we've got to get a pass rusher. We've got to get a Nick. We've got to get a safety. And to get 2 pass rushers that they coveted, using that first round pick next year, this year, and some DBs, we'll see how it pans out, right? But I think in theory, the NFL draft could not have gone any better for the Atlanta Falcons, in their opinion.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned this in your piece, and this has been something that's you've seen floated out, and it's been something I've talked about on Locked On Falcons basically since February, where a lot of the love for Jalen Walker is because I think a lot of people see him as a Micah Parsons-like sort of player. And you go back to what you said earlier with the Falcons taking Kyle Pitts back in that 2021 draft. Do you get that sense that in some ways that this is kind of a do-over if Jalen Walker can kind of live up to that potential?
I do. And I don't want to misquote him here, because I did bring up Micah Parsons in a conversation with Terry Fontenot, and he's like, you know what? Nobody compares to Micah Parsons, but they do see the same versatility in Jalen Walker's game. This is somebody who's 6'1", 243, played on the ball, off the ball. And this is what Terry said, quote, you see exactly who he is when you watch the tape, the way he plays, the physicality, the toughness, the instincts, the intelligence. It all screams off the tape. When you read all the character and the makeup on him, his dad's a coach. He grew up with a football in his hand. Unbelievable leader, can play stack, can rush anywhere on the field. Yeah. To answer your question, yeah, I think that this is the player that they could have had all along if they just drafted Micah Parsons. Now he'll have to prove it, but when they're kind of piecing together this defense and how he'll be used, I think he's going to be used the exact same way, right? Like he is going to be on the edge. That's where, because it's always a tough balance, like you don't want to be a jack of all trades, a master of none. And I think, look at Isaiah Simmons. Like he's kind of the cautionary tale, drafted in the top 5, Arizona, just freak of nature athlete. And he's kind of just been used all over the place. And he's on his 3rd team with the Green Bay Packers now. And he said something to the effect last week, like, it's nice that I'm just focusing on one thing. My mind's kind of been all over the place. So I think that'll be important for the Falcons. Like, yeah, Jalen Walker can do all of these things, but number one, the game's about affecting the quarterback. So that, and the best way to do that is, right, being on the ball, creating a mismatch, and just moving upfield. But it sure doesn't hurt if you can do some of the other stuff, because, there's a scout who told Bob, like, defensive coordinators are frothing at the mouth to get this guy, just because he is going to add another layer of unpredictability to your scheme that usually players can't at that age.
So Jalen Walker was not the only first-round edge rushers the Falcons took. Of course, they took James Pearce, and we'll get into more of Tyler's insight into the more controversial of the team's 2 first-round picks coming up on today's Locked On Falcons. So most of you were probably listening to this episode after the NBA Finals, but some of you are listening beforehand. And as you sit here, you probably have about 45 minutes between now and tip-off. And FanDuel's going to help you get in on the action before tip-off. And if you're listening to this after tip-off, before that final whistle, FanDuel is also going to help you right? They have so many ways to bet live during the game, and it's going to make every game more exciting. And if you are listening to this after the finals are officially over, don't worry. It's still the summer. And while the NBA is over and the NFL hasn't quite begun yet, summer sports are still in full swing, whether you're into baseball, golf, soccer, etc. And again, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. And of course, we love FanDuel because it's easy to use. And of course, you get that fast payout. Who doesn't like getting paid quickly, right? And so it's going to make every regular season game, regardless of the sport, feel like must-watch events. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's a perfect time to sign up, as new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. Again, that's FanDuel.com/locked on to get started today. Now, the other player the Falcons selected in round 1 was James Pearce, as you mentioned. I think the team went into the draft fully prepared to take James Pearce at pick 15 because of the expectation that, Jaylen Walker could potentially be long gone. James Pearce is the more controversial of the two selections that the Falcons made in round 1 due to the air quotes concerns about Pearce, which were outlined by your colleague Bob McGinn in his breakdown of this draft class, talking to some anonymous scouts. And then you couple that with the decision to burn through next year's number 1 pick, right? Again, that speaks to the sort of sense of urgency that is in this building, where they can't afford to wait till next year to use that first round pick because they might not be here in order to use that pick. And so obviously that tells you that the team had a lot of conviction on James Pearce, but as they say, where there's smoke, there's fire usually. And the fact that the Falcons felt so compelled to do their due diligence on James Pearce kind of tells you that they were maybe hearing and seeing some of the same stuff that was being said about James Pearce. So, from your perspective, when you look at the James Pearce selection, do you see it in the same light as a home run? Is there a little bit more risk to it? How do you sort of assess that selection?
Totally different player, right? I mean, this is somebody who's built unlike most players who are trying to sack a quarterback. 6'5", 245, runs a 4.4. Even in that, I like DNs and outside backers wearing number 27 too. It just aesthetically, I kind of like it. I like something different, but he is different. And I think that they knew about the red flags. How could they not? Like, they've got their own scouts. They're talking to people in Knoxville. You referenced the stuff that McGinn had at our site. I mean, people can check it out if they want, but I mean, it was all over the place about him being a quote unquote complete lone ranger by himself on the sideline, standing 20 yards from anybody on his team. Didn't look like he cared at all. Claims he was a captain and a leader and all that stuff, but it's just one of those things that he might have been anointed that versus earning it. There's another story a scout told where, like, nobody knew where he was at one point on his own program. The whole team's working out and he's in an apartment. Some pretty bad stuff, right? Like football character stuff. So when we kind of transition in conversation from Jaylen Walker to James Pearce, I was like, okay, Terry, like everything that you're kind of saying about Jaylen Walker, wanting your son to grow up and be like that. The rap sheet, the reputation of James Pearce is the exact opposite, at least from these anonymous scouts. And he said, look, there's a lot of false stuff out there. And I brought up a specific on him being a lone ranger, kind of off to himself. He said, look, I don't want to get into specifics, but we do our homework. And then he got into that homework, and holy hell, they really did on James Pearce. And I think it all started with wanting to put him through a workout in Charlotte, right early in that process. And after the combine, he blows up the combine, which a lot of guys don't even work out at the combine. He did great. And they wanted to work him out in Charlotte. It's raining there. Terry tells his agent, Tori Dandy, like, don't worry about it. And James Pearce says, oh no, I want to do it. Any weather. He was willing to work out. So Terry kind of had to be the one to step in and say, look, we'll just bring you in on a top 30 visit. Don't worry about it. But that was kind of James Pearce passing that first test. Like, the fact that he was willing to work out in rain and sleet and snow, whatever the hell the weather is, does speak to him as a competitor. I mean, because remember, this is 2025, the era of NIL and transfer portal and all of these top prospects kind of incubating themselves with yes men, yes women. Nobody in their inner circle, like, telling him that they're, stinks. It's a different time. And the fact that James Pearce was willing to do whatever, I think was a good first impression. They bring him in on the visit. They get to know him on a one-on-one basis. That goes great. And I'm sure as a lot of your listeners know, they did fly into his hometown, sat down with James Pearce's mom the day before the draft, and that kind of sealed it that they were in hot pursuit of him. They wanted him in their building. And it's also twofold. Like, it's not just what you learn about James Pearce, separating fact from fiction. It's also having trust in what you have in your building. I mean, he's 21 years old. I mean, I'm thinking back to when I'm 21 and all the dumb stuff I probably did. I mean, you can still grow as a human being. I just want, and the environment variable matters. And we forget about that. Like, if Jalen Carter gets drafted by the Las Vegas Raiders, right? They had a chance to draft him. Where does his career go? I don't know. He had a lot of the same red flags out of Georgia. People wondered if he loved the game, but he gets to Philadelphia. He's with some Georgia teammates. He's with fantastic coaching, a great culture. And now he's just smacking Patrick Mahomes in the head in a Super Bowl. And everybody's wondering how in the hell the Eagles got this guy. The Falcons believe they have the infrastructure to maximize James Pearce and help him grow and mature as a person. And so, there are maybe some limitations football wise that, his linear build, how does that hold up in the NFL? We'll see. But he is just built differently than Jalen Walker. And I think that is, hey, if you think you're going to win, if you think you're going to be in the playoffs, you have no problem trading a future first-round pick for this guy at 26, right? He fell because of all these red flags, and they felt confident in taking him, that they found out who the real James Pearce is and who the real James Pearce can become.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because as you outlined, they put such an emphasis on makeup and sort of, when, again, you're reading some of these quotes and seeing some of these things from anonymous sources about James Pearce, it doesn't seem to fit. I mean, I said it on the podcast the week before the draft when we started talking about, didn't spend really any time thinking about James Pearce being a Falcon for most of this offseason. It was like, oh, well, that's just not the type of player that the Falcons gravitate towards. And then like the Monday of before the draft, there's a bunch of mock drafts and the NFL insiders coming out saying that, oh, the Falcons are interested in James Pearce. And it's like, that's interesting. And so it's like, we got to talk about this in earnest as a real possibility. And it did sort of come to fruition. But, when it comes to these anonymous scout sources, they're very controversial in certain media circles and whatnot. And obviously, due to your connection to Bob McGinn, who's been publishing these sort of pre-draft breakdowns of these top prospects that include a lot of these quotes for, I don't know, decades, it feels like at this point in time. I'm sure you have a very unique perspective on this. And we'll get more of that unique perspective on the controversy surrounding anonymous scout quotes from Tyler Dunne of golongtd.com coming up as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. But as I said, these quotes are often very controversial. They received a lot more attention this year due to the Shedeur Sanders sort of saga and people sort of thinking some of the quotes that were coming out about him in the lead up to the draft were, contributing factor to his unprecedented fall down draft boards and character assassinated. So I guess for me, Tyler, what do you say when sort of these pieces from the Bob McGinns of the world get this sort of criticism? Do you feel like there is a place for these anonymous scout quotes in, this pre-draft cycle on an annual basis?
No doubt about it. It's funny too on Shedeur Sanders. I was kind of bracing for that quarterback piece to land in my email inbox from McGinn. Like, oh man, what are these scouts going to say about Shedeur? They were actually really nice, right? It was Tom Pelissero's reporting that had like the comments that were like, holy hell. But yeah, like, scouts saw him as a first round pick, very accurate. I think the criticism there was a scout said something down the lines of, I'm paraphrasing, like he didn't get any genes from his dad. Like it's all from mom because he didn't run a 40. And there's a scout saying, I would have bet my NFL career earnings on the fact that he would never run a 40 because he's not athletic. But to answer your question, I feel like it absolutely serves a purpose because the NFL draft coverage is on. I mean, I remember as a kid growing up in like the late 90s, and it was like you go on vacation with your family and you got like the one Pro Football Weekly magazine, and that's it for draft coverage. I'm just sitting on the beach with my dad, and we're just talking about these guys, and nobody's really talking about it much on TV. You know, maybe you get John Clayton or Mort pop up and they talk about something happening. It is omnipresent. There is no escape. ESPN, NFL Network, every podcast, every website. I mean, it is the draft industrial complex. Like the term itself doesn't even do it justice. I feel like it's year round and it's on everybody's brains because you can sell hope for all 32 teams. Like the season ends, your team went 4-13, you can start thinking about a mock draft. You can get excited about player X. And I feel like most mainstream play off that sense of hope. You turn in to the network. I know a lot of people at NFL Network, ESPN. I'm not saying they're all like this, but it's by and large very positive. And the verbiage is very tame and calculated. And it's, somebody doesn't struggle with something. It's, he's just got to work on this part of his game a little bit. And look, the NFL is a big boy league. Coaches are fired, scouts are fired, players are cut, GMs get fired, lives get uprooted, families are forced to move from one city to the next. Like these NFL teams, they're not coding their language with niceties and putting lipstick on the pig, so to speak. Like they've got to be brutally honest with each other because heck, their butts are on the line. Fans paying all this money to go to games. Like, do you want the sanitized version of the NFL or do you want the good, the bad, and the ugly? So that's why I'm thrilled to incorporate Bob's coverage and go along because it's based on decades of being in the business of relationship building. These are scouts that he's talked to for years. And not just that, I think you see anonymous scout from Bob McGinn and you think it's like, some crusty old white guy who's been around since the 70s. Trust me, he's got scouts of all ages, of all backgrounds. And he's constantly kind of building up that Rolodex to the point where it's based off of the reader's trust in McGinn. I get that. If you're a reader and you don't trust anonymous sourcing, then that's fine. Just throw the TV on and love every prospect that they're talking about. But if you want to wade into those choppy waters and maybe see how these scouts really do view these prospects, that's why we have Bob, right? And I've heard the criticism too that, these scouts are only saying bad stuff about a prospect because they want that prospect to fall. Like they want to put this out there. It's fair criticism. All I can say is like Bob's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He's been doing this a long time. He's a people person. He can smell BS, right? If somebody's feeding him BS, he ain't going to use it. And these relationships aren't based off of hot air and BS. He knows who he's talking to, where it's coming from. And look, these guys aren't always right. He's the first to say a scout could be really critical of a prospect and be dead ass wrong too. So, and the same scout, the same prospect can have, you can hear totally different things from scouts. Two scouts can see something totally different in the same prospect. So, yeah, I get it. I get the criticism. We see it every year, right? The S2 stuff with CJ Stroud a couple years ago kind of blew up. But the fact is teams were using this S2 cognitive test. So Bob's just reporting on what teams are doing. And that was his score. Maybe he blew off the test. Maybe CJ Stroud just didn't really care about taking it that much, but that was his score. And that was what was written. So, and now players don't really want to take that test, which is their right. But anyways, yeah, I get it, Aaron. Like we hear it every year. But we'll try to, bring folks to the real NFL. There was a coach last year, it was the AD Mitchell stuff, the Texas wide receiver, and how he maybe, I think he's got diabetes, right? And there was a scout that said he doesn't really take his meds and he can kind of become somebody else maybe. And that kind of wades into some personal stuff. I get it. But when that kind of went viral, I did have a coach, let's just say for an NFC team, text me and say, that was the worst workout I've ever seen in my life, AD Mitchell. Like he just straight up quit and he's moody and he's temperamental. And Bob's story hit the nail on the head, this coach said. And I can promise you this coach is not the crusty old white guy who's been in the NFL since the 70s. So and his point was there's the NFL on Twitter and then there's the real NFL. Those were his words exactly. And sometimes the real NFL, it ain't pretty. I mean, we had a 3-part series on the coach here in Buffalo, New York. It wasn't pretty a couple years ago with, 9/11 speeches and whatnot. So it's a big boy league, and we'll try to, bring that to viewers and listeners and readers best we can.
Yeah. Saying I'm a fan of it, I guess, is maybe not the best way of terming it, but I certainly think there is absolutely value to it because, we see every year with these draft picks where guys will not go where they're projected to go. And it's almost always either due to some unknown injury issue or because teams were like, we don't know if we trust that guy in our building and we'll let somebody else take that risk on that player. And I think having that information, and as you say, like sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it may be a little, misguided or whatever, but it is, to me, having that information out there, I do think it's valuable. But certainly I understand why people tend to be critical of it because, it's just words on a page or whatever, right. And you don't have necessarily a name or face to say this person said this thing. And so therefore it does feel like to a lot of folks that aren't necessarily in, the journalism business of being like, all of these things are made up about a person as opposed to actually coming from the words of people in the league and whatnot. So it is going to continue to be controversial, but I will just say from my own perspective, Tyler, I hope you and Bob continue to put that information out there into the future.
I appreciate that, Aaron. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody out there who subscribes to GoLongTD.com to get this kind of stuff. I feel like there is a lane, and it's not just draft coverage. I've done some deeper dives on teams where to get people speaking honestly, I mentioned that Bills story. I've done a 3-parter on like the New York Giants when things were kind of falling apart with Dave Gettleman talking to a lot of those scouts with the Giants, talking to people in the Vikings building about Mike Zimmer. It was not pretty. Like sometimes, like to get that unvarnished truth, you do have to grant anonymity, right? You have to allow people to speak freely, without their name attached to it. I get the criticism, right? I would love it if these coaches, scouts, players, everybody attach their name to it. But a lot of them are still in the NFL. There's fear of retribution of, just being blackballed, blacklisted, all of that. But they still want to get that truth out there, whatever that truth is. So I think there is a value to kind of taking people behind the curtain in that regard.
Okay, guys, that's going to do it for us here on today's episode. We will be back with more illustrious content for you here on the Locked On Falcons podcast. Don't quite know exactly what I'm going to get into. I know some of you guys are eagerly waiting for that Jack Nelson breakdown. We will get to it this week. I promise you on that one. But yeah, we'll get into that, not tomorrow, but later this week. And we'll probably continue to explore, some of the topics that Tyler discussed on recent episodes, as well as other guests have discussed in recent weeks about, whether or not this team can contend and some of the ways that they can succeed in their contention as we move forward. So those are some of the topics in store for you on future episodes of the Locked On Falcons podcast. So continue to make us your first listen by subscribing or following for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And for your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast with the draft dudes, Joe Marino, Kyle Krabs. They're going to make you the most informed fan all summer long. All you got to do is make Locked On NFL Scouting your next listen. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.